Dr. Pierre, I really appreciate you taking time to have this short interview with you. You are a super busy person, so we really appreciate you. Rest assured, this would be very essential for those who are just starting out. So thank you so much. Dr. Barry Pierre is a board certified internist. He is also a founder of drbarrypierre.com, a CEO of Pierre Medical Consulting. And like what I told you, I just thought of ways to help my fellow Filipino moms. I know that a lot of them are just starting out. And even though I've been doing this for years, I wanted to see how I can help them. So I thought, why don't I ask Dr. Barry and see if he can provide some point of view on the interview process, and then it can probably help them out.
Thank you for
Um,
having me, and hope to, provide as much benefit to everyone who's going to be watching this, because, we've talked, but I definitely think this is something that, needs to be said, and definitely glad to be able to part and help out somebody.
yes, thank you. All right. So for our first question, what would make you hire a newbie with no experience at all? Or do you think you would ever hire someone who has no experience?
It's interesting. I think especially when we're thinking about newbies, because like everyone, I always say you have to start somewhere. If I was going to hire a newbie, like I'd like to want to make sure that this person just wants to work, right? And is
Mm-hmm.
willing to learn, and is willing to learn kind of on the fly, right? Because that's what you typically do as a newbie. I think what happens when you're a newbie, but sometimes you kind of restrict yourself in your learning, I think that becomes more of a hindrance. But if you're like, hey, I'm new, I don't have an experience, but I can't be an experience blank, right? If I don't get the experience in the first place, like I think that's what like starts off the trouble, right? So if you say, "Hey, I want to learn anything you want to teach me," and you're willing and you're enthusiastic about it, I think that's going to take you a long way.
I agree with you on that, because if even though those who have been in the industry for years, if they're not willing to learn, and if not they're not very teachable, then there's going to be a problem. So
And you said, I think you said a key word, teachable, especially as a newbie. Sometimes even when you're new and you don't have the experience, you sometimes have some preconceptions of how things should work, and you
yeah,
have to just kind of go with the flow, be very moldable, and be able to kind of like fit your potential client.
exactly. So our second question is, what makes an applicant stand out for you, Dr. Barry?
I think one of the big things is, one, I like to see the enthusiasm right from the beginning. I like to see that, again, we'll stick on the newbie, right? If you're a
Yeah.
newbie and, but I could tell that you're excited about wanting to learn, and you're excited about wanting to do some homework on the client, that's going to help you stand out, right? And let's say if you're not a newbie, right? Let's say you're experienced in data processing,
Mm.
customer service and something in that regards, and you go kind of above and beyond. I think that kind of stands out the best, right? Like, again, I'll tell a little secret. When I was looking for a VA for myself, I remember kind of going to your site, and you had like this video cartoon. I forget, I don't know how to describe it. It was like this cartoon kind of describing like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I like to do, and this is what I can do for you. And I was like, you know what? If this person is willing, before they even get the client, to go above and beyond to say like, hey, like this is who I am, this is what I'm willing to do, and I just want to help you, I'm like, oh, all right, I'm sold.
I call that a video resume.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So what made you decide to outsource and hire Filipino freelancer?
I think one of the big thing is definitely word of mouth. I'm a physician, and one of my physician colleagues who also does podcasting and blogging and everything else, I remember asking them like, hey, how are you able to do all of the stuff that you're able to do, right? Because here I am on the outside looking in and seeing one person being able to, run 6 different podcasts,
Yeah.
2 different blogs, and all these different things. I'm like, no, this is just one. How is he able to do this?
Yeah.
And when I
The,
asked him, he was like, no, you need an assistant. You need someone to do the work for you, right? So you can save your time and focus on other things, right? And I think that's what kind of opened my eyes. And then he was like, you know what? I got the great service for you. And he actually referred me to the job board that,
yeah.
I found you. So it was definitely word of mouth for sure. And I think especially in this industry, when you're looking for work and you look for clientele, that's usually where it starts.
Yeah. So that answers my next question actually. Like, when did you hear about the virtual assistant? Because there's just no way you can do all of that on your own, right?
What's happened, I could tell you, especially for most, business people, especially when they're starting out,
Hmm.
is they are kind of doing a lot of this stuff kind of on their own, right? Because that's kind of how they know. You definitely know, especially because we kind of work with me.
Yeah.
And then you get to a point, you get to like a plateau that you can only do so much. And I think as a business person, as an entrepreneur, we treat our business like our baby.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's very difficult to kind of let go, because if we think we let go, that our business will go down, right? But once we realize, like, no, if I get someone to help me, build with me, right? If I get someone to, take this load off my shoulders so I can
Yeah.
focus myself
On the
on something
core.
else, right?
Yes.
Like
The
all of a
core
sudden the
business.
business grows. Right. And that's a very weird thing when you think about it. Like, you mean if I get people to help me, then that means I can do more work? Like, that's a very crazy concept to think about,
Yeah.
especially when you're an entrepreneur starting from the beginning. But that's what happens, right? Like because I knew of VAs, like I knew people who were, VAs and people who had VAs, but honestly, I couldn't understand, like, there's nothing a VA could do for me. I can already do it for myself. But once I realized, like, you know what, like, can I do it for myself, and should I be doing it for myself? Like, once
Yeah.
I was able to kind of get that question, once I asked myself, should I be the one doing this? Should I be the one doing that? Like, the VA makes so much more sense.
Yeah, and then that will give you more time to just focus on your core business functions. That's why it's important to delegate to other people. So, how important is communication skills in an applicant for you?
I think it's big, especially when you're working with a VA who may be residing in a different country, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you can kind of get your point across, right, and your
Mm-hmm.
objective, right? And you want to make sure that you can kind of see an eye in where you want to grow. As a businessman, as an entrepreneur, when you say, you know what, I need a VA to kind of help me and help my business move along, you have to understand that this is usually going to be for the long run,
Yeah.
and we need to kind of grow together. So if you as a business person isn't communicating what you want your VA to do, how you want your VA to do it, when you want your VA to do it, right? You can't be mad, right? If
Yeah.
they're not doing to your level of expectation, because you've never set that out. So I think a lot of times when we focus on the communication aspect, we think it's one-sided, that, the VA has to be all communicating. Like, no,
Mm-hmm.
no, no. Like, first and foremost, you, the business person, has to be the one to be able to kind of lay out, like, say, hey, this is
Yep.
what I want. This is how I want it, right? And then continuously working on it.
Yeah. When it comes to that as a communication, are you okay with just those who are good with written communication skills, or is verbal communication skills as important as
I, th-
written?
I think it depends on the skill. I think it depends on the skill level. I think it depends on the job effort and work. I know a lot of business people who they can communicate all of their ideas and wants, right, through words,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't take
Yeah.
much. It's a couple emails. Hey, I want you to do this, that, and then you just go.
Yeah.
And I know some people who kind of need that face to face to be able to talk and say, like, hey, this is what I want you to do. For some, I think even for a business person, for some, they just want to be able to see like some type of connection. Like, okay, all right.
Hmm.
All right, that's a real person I'm talking to, right? Like, in the word VA is virtual, right? So
Yes.
because we're not next to each other, right? Sometimes it's difficult to grasp that prospect that, like, oh,
Hmm.
this is a partner that I'm working with. So even though I don't physically see them, like, they're lockstep and key with me. So I think for sure, I think it really depends on the job duty, and
Hmm.
and that's where I think as the business person, right, as an entrepreneur, you have to be front and center, like, hey, this is how I want, and this is what's best for me.
Hmm.
Because if you know what's best for you, right, then your VA can rise to that level of challenge, right? But if you don't know what's best for you, your VA is going to be left out in the water, try to understand. And again, when we talk about communication, that's where the communication starts to tumble, right? Because you
Yep.
haven't laid out exactly the best way you want to be communicated with.
Yep. Exactly. So that's important also. Setting the right expectation to your people is very important.
Hmm.
So when it comes to applications, Dr. Barry, do you check the candidates' social media?
I think for me, because I knew one of my goals for my VA was to help me do social media. I wanted to see that my VA could do social media like
Yeah.
themselves, right? Like, I wanted to see that it wasn't a deal breaker for me, but it definitely was a plus, right? It was a
Mm-hmm.
plus that, all right, yeah, they're already on this social media platform. Okay, they're already on that social media platform. So when you, as an entrepreneur, if you come in with ideas and say, hey, like, I would like to be able to do this on this platform, this on this platform, it doesn't sound foreign
Mm-hmm.
to them. So I think it is a plus, especially in this day and age as a business.
Yes.
you almost, social media is required. Like you're not going to prosper as a business anymore if you're not on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to have an amazing working relationship with your VA, right, you almost want that VA to have some relationship with social media. Now, again, like I said, there's so many platforms out now, right?
Yep.
We know there's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok. There's all
LinkedIn.
these,
Yes.
yeah, LinkedIn. There's all these different social media platforms. So I'm not saying that you need to be an expert in all of them,
Yeah.
because there's no one who's an expert in all of them, right? But whatever you are the expert in, make sure you highlight that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree with you. So, what do you think are the challenges of working remotely, Dr. Barry?
I think one of the biggest things is just the scheduling standpoint at first. I think one of the first things when you're beginning to schedule and understanding, like, hey, you're not going to be on the same time zone. So
Yes.
when you're having meetings and everything else, you may have a meeting that's morning for you but night for them, or vice versa, right? So
Yes.
I think that was one of the first things that I think from a challenge standpoint. And then I think you're always concerned, especially here. I think we have a bias here in the United States, right, where we think technology is only good here in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
think that, like, oh, there's going to be technological problems if I work with someone in a different country, right? So again, and that's why as a VA, especially in the beginning when you get your application, right, you want to kind of lay that out, like, hey, we are not going to have any technical difficulties. I'm
Yes.
going to be able to contact. I can get online. I can do these things here to kind of appease some of those biases that may come and trickle on from that standpoint, as well as communication, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to working with VA, especially in a different country, what's the best way to communicate? Is
Yes.
it through Skype, right? Do you have a Skype, right? Is it through email? Like, what type of email? Like, is a video? Like, what do you want to do to be able to kind of get your point across? So I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be ready to kind of adjust, right? I think an entrepreneur, you have to say, like, all right, these are some of the, like, yeah, I may not be able to call my VA like on the phone, but if I send a Skype message, if I send, a LinkedIn message, like, they'll get it the same. Like,
Yes.
and I think we need to move away from the structure of, like, oh, I should be, my VA should be like right next to me. That's literally defeats the purpose of having a VA. No, your VA should be able to be anywhere, not in the state, not in the city, in the world, right? And still work for your business, right? Because
Yes.
that's really where the planning comes in. So I think those are, as an entrepreneur, that's probably the biggest challenges, is just kind of getting the schedule down,
Mm-hmm.
making sure there's no technology concerns, right? So you can get in contact with your VA, like, if you need to get in contact with your VA, understanding. I mean, even me, right? There was even pay, right? Like, and like having to pay, like, all right, how do I pay? Like, it was just like all of
Yes.
these things that you didn't think about till you have to think about it, right? And
Yes.
again, these are small hurdles,
Mm-hmm.
but as an entrepreneur who may be like getting their feet in the water, right? And it's like, oh, you know what? I think I need a VA. You almost want to chop those hurdles as
Mm-hmm.
quick as possible, right? Because any of those little hurdles will make them say, yeah, you know what? I'll just go back and do it myself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you want to kind of be able to kind of answer those hurdles for your potential client, because they, even though they may not verbally say it right, they may be
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it. So you want to be able to kind of
Yes.
knock that bias down as quick as possible.
Yep. Exactly. Is there ever an applicant that you regret hiring?
I don't necessarily, because it's funny, because I think I've had great luck. I've only had to hire 3 applicants. You were my second VA,
Yeah.
and my first VA, I didn't actually regret. She just kind of disappeared on me. I don't know, honestly, to the day I have no
She
clue.
went
But
ghost.
yeah, she wouldn't ghost on me. So again, that's where as a fear, right? Like, if you're a business person, like, hey, like, I entrust like someone to do these things for me, and they kind of disappear, right? That could be another fear that a person has. But I don't really call it a regret, because I think it's a learning lesson, right? When you're
Yeah.
working in a business, right, you gotta understand, like, not everything's gonna be like 100% knocked out of park, right? But
Mm.
you just gotta learn and go from it, right? So I was able to take that experience and, like, okay, all right, you know what? They kind of went ghost on me, and I probably could tell you exactly what happened. When we were doing our initial communication, was more like once every 2 to 3 weeks. So it was such a
Ah.
long time frame
Yes.
before we would communicate again. That by the time that 2 to 3 weeks came around, like, oh, okay, don't hear from you. Oh, 3 weeks. All right, don't hear from you.
Yeah.
4 weeks, they're like, and then I was just like, oh, all right, that's
Okay,
all right.
it's what it is.
It is what it
I
is.
guess.
So what did I do? Right, I changed this. All right, we got to talk every week, right? Because
Yes.
even if we're not talking big stuff on a week-to-week basis, right?
Mhm.
At least we're chopping small trees down on a week-to-week
Yes.
basis, and that kind of quells any fears I might have that my great VA may leave, right? Like, so now that like, oh, at least I talked to her last week, so if I don't talk to her in a week and 3 days, I'm like, oh, what happened, right? So
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those things that kind of help build me further better, and then even working with the people I work with now, right? Understanding that it is a working relationship, right? You gotta, I think, as bosses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we think that our VA or whoever we hire, right, whether you're graphic design, whatever you do, right, like they're working for you, but no, you're actually working for them, right? Because if I don't do what I need to do, they have no work to do, right?
Yes.
So I have to make sure I'm continuously, making the effort, putting in the work, so they have work to do to help me be better. So I think kind of learning that relationship was definitely big for me as well, because essentially you were my first employee, right? So like I've
Mm-hmm.
never had an employee before, so I never realized like, oh, these are things I need to like make sure I'm following up with my employee. I make sure I gotta contact my, like, all these things I never had to deal with because I was the employee, I was the solo person.
Yes.
But once you let go of that responsibility and you say like, hey, I'm entrusting you to help me do these things, right? You're giving that responsibility to them, and now you have to continue to provide, so they have
Mm-hmm.
more to provide for you.
Yes. And actually, that's what I appreciate about you, because even though you have that experience with a Filipino freelancer, you still went with a Filipino freelancer. Yeah. So that's
Yeah, no,
really,
and that's what I figured. I was like, you know what, it's a good lesson, right?
yeah.
Like, again, something happened, and I wish I could say like something happened. I don't know. So I like, that's okay. Well, we'll do better the second time. Again, the second
Yeah.
time, the application process was kind of the same, and I like, all right, nope. I need them to be able to do this. Why? Because my last VA could do that. So my
Yes.
last VA could do that. I don't want to like go down, right? So because now my last VA has set the bar, right? So she
Mm-hmm.
set the bar of where I want. So now I know exactly what I want, and then I know what things I need to tweak on
Yes.
top of it.
Yeah. And speaking of that, what would make you automatically reject an application?
I think, well, at least, especially we're focusing on like, at least from the application job board site, a lot of times, we'll ask like kind of general questions, because what I've noticed, right, at least, and again, we can just focus specifically on that website. We don't need a name, especially since they're not
Yeah.
cutting us a check, right? I might ask a question in my initial stage, like, hey, I'm looking for a VA that could do this, 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 and that, right? But I think some people are so programmed, and I guess because they see so many opportunities, that they
Mm-hmm.
have this a response kind of copy and paste it, copy and paste it, copy and paste it, and they never actually answer like any of the questions that I asked like in the
Yes.
initial stage. I'm like, okay, all right, so you're just not going to even answer the question, delete, right? Because I know if just in my initial impression, right, that you don't follow directions, it's going to be difficult for you to follow directions later on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the first things, right? Like, of course, if you're looking for a VA and grammar and spelling and all those things, right? Obviously, you got to make sure that grammar and spelling is good when they present, especially with their CV or their resume or however they
Yes.
present. So being able to kind of understand and flesh out, like, okay, all right, this is some of the pros and cons that I want in a VA. And if they answer those questions, like
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost, and that's where I'm like, okay, all right, you passed the first step.
Yes.
But unfortunately, on that job site, there was a lot of people who didn't even pass the first step, right? There's a lot of people who it was just copy and pasting me. And I'm like, okay, you're not going to read what I said. Okay, delete,
Yeah.
delete, delete. And it made it easy for me, right? Because if
Yes.
you're not even going to read what I posted, like how can I expect you to follow up on the task that requires you to kind of run the show? Like I can't expect that.
I think that's what I learned from all these interview that we have, because of the applicants just have the tendency of having this template and just like you said, sending in hopes that by sending a lot of applications, it will boost their chances of getting
Mm-hmm.
hired. When in fact, because they were not reading,
Right.
that decreases the chances, you know?
Right. Like I remember when I first put out like, oh, I wanted a VA. And then there's people who are graphic designers. There are people who are this. And I'm not saying you can't be a graphic designer and be a VA, but you should at least be talking about why you want to be a VA, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't say, oh, I did this graphic design and I use this program and I use that program and I use that program. So you're not even like going into the fact that like, hey, I want to be a VA. You could say like, oh, and as a bonus, right?
Mhm.
I also do graphic design if you need those needs as well, but I'm ready to work for you, right? Like you can,
Yeah.
it's an easy transition, right? To not discredit
Yes.
what you already know how to do well, but
Mhm.
also like say like, hey, I think I'm the person for the job you may be looking for.
Yeah. That's nice. That's a very good pointer there, Dr. Berry. I think you kind of answered this already, but how many Filipino freelancers have you worked with so far? And
So
why
so
do you
far,
like working
so
with?
far, four total. One created my website. Two my prior VA, and then I'm working with you as well as I'm working with an audio and as well as a transcriptionist as
Yes.
well. Reason why I love working with them is very appreciative, right? Works hard, right?
Mhm.
Is they're usually not people you have to like chase to work, right?
Yeah.
And then even as a business person, very affordable, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're in a business, right, and like if I wanted to get a VA who does your job, like I'd probably have to pay 3 times as much here in the States, right?
Hmm.
So like just being able to like afford, right, especially as a solopreneur just
Yes.
starting out, just to be able to kind of afford, having a person who's willing to work just as hard, right,
Hmm.
and and take the pay and do all those things there. I mean that's an easy decision for me.
Yeah.
And like I said, their level of work, because it's not as if there's a drop off, right? Because they're in a
Hmm.
different country, right? So I think
Hmm.
that's one thing, especially some people may feel like, oh, if I'm in a different country, maybe I'm less experienced than someone over here. That's not the case, right?
Yep.
They're just as experienced. They're just in a different country. They're literally, all it is they're literally just in a different country. But in this world, social media and everything else, where your business is essentially going to be online one way or the
Yes.
right? Like we're trying to, those walls are broken, right? Like I don't need a person, who's right down the street from me, right? I don't need that anymore, right? I just need someone who can turn the computer on, right? And
Yes.
then go to work.
Yep. What would make you terminate an employment?
Definitely, not following directions.
Hmm.
And not following directions is, key, right? Because when you have to tease out, right? Did they not follow my directions because I didn't give them adequate directions, right?
Hmm.
So trying to understand, like, all right, why didn't they follow the directions, I gave, right? And then two, punctuality,
Hmm.
especially in the business where punctuality is extremely important. You and I know system that we kind of have. If something isn't done, like again, that's why I'm going back to me, right? If I don't do something at a certain time, right, then all my other people can't work, right?
Yes.
Like that's literally how it
It's
goes.
a
Uh,
domino effect.
yeah, it's a domino effect. So you have to be able to kind of understand that and say, like, all right, like if you're not one with the team, if you don't want to work
Hmm.
with the team, if punctuality isn't a thing for you, right, like you're not going to last long.
Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be my last question, Dr. Berry. So what's one advice would you give an aspiring Filipino applicant or freelancer?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is your level of enthusiasm that you have when you're ready to work with a client is going to set you apart, right? Once a client understands that, you know what, this person wants to work with me, this person wants to do a job and they want to see me do well, then the feeling becomes reciprocated. I tell my VA all the time, who you, or I tell you all the time, my job, right, is to get you so good, right, that you have to leave me, right? Like there's going to be a point where I'm going to train you so well that you're not going to be able to stay with me, right? Because
Yeah.
and that's the goal, right? If you are working with a potential client, right, you have to let that client know, like, hey, I'm ready to take your business to the next level. You have to be confident. You have to let them know, like, hey, whatever you need, I'm here to help you. And once your client sees that, like, it's going to make their day. Again, remember the goal is really like, how do I break down some of the mental barriers that my potential client may have, right? How do I chop that, like their concern for punctuality? How do I chop
Mhm.
that their concern for things happening on time, right? How do I chop all of these, little concerns that they may have that may say like, I'm not sure if I should make this leap.
Yeah.
Because once you do, it's such an easy thing. And your client should want you to grow, right?
Yes.
I would put an asterisk, especially for potential VAs, right? If you're in a position where, it doesn't feel like your client wants you to grow, they kind of want to keep you stagnated, you know what? I would kind of suggest, not to say leave them, right? But like be open to hearing different offers, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to grow as well,
Yeah.
right? Like you can't be in running and in charge of growing someone's business, and they're not teaching you tangible skills that you can then turn around and put on your CV, right? If they're not transferring, right, that level of responsibility and that gift of knowledge to you, right, like that's a red flag for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just me being, the client that I am, and saying like how can I continue to build, right? Because again, I'm thinking if I build my VA and the people I work with better skills, they'll just reciprocate that back to my business.
Yes.
Like it's a
It's a
win-win
win-win. Yeah.
win-win situation for me. So understanding that in the beginning, right, you may have to work hard,
Mm-hmm.
but understand that if you show that enthusiasm with your client, if you show that like, hey, I'm really to put my foot to the ground and get to work, I think it's going to end up for the better.
Yeah. And moms, I just want to say how blessed I am with Dr. Barry, because he really wants me to learn more. So he's even having me take paid seminars, online webinars. So
Like I'll do
that
courses, and I'm like, let me just look at this course, and like, hey, jump in this course. Yeah. And then now that's a skill, right, that you have,
Yes.
right? You can say like, oh yeah, like if you want to help grow your podcast, I got plenty of tips. And like, and again, that's where, if you're the business person, right, if you're the entrepreneur and you want your business to grow, you have to understand like you need to equip your VA with that knowledge, right? I can't keep it here.
Yep.
Right. Like if internet stopped and for some reason I couldn't go online, could I do the stuff in my business? Sure. Would I want to, especially at this point? No. Right. Because the system, we have such a great system that I'm just like, all right. I just know it gets done. Like, so I don't have to worry about those things. And now that I don't have to worry about those things, I can like focus on stuff over here that I never had time to focus on because I was busy looking back. Right.
Yeah.
So helping your client look forward, move the business forward, bringing ideas for your client. Like, hey, like I see that you do this, but like I would recommend maybe doing that. Like those types of ideas like go such a long way, and then really kind of help stagger you and kind of separate you from, because like I said, I know at least that job board, I know there's a lot of people looking, right? And what helped Lynn stand out, once she answered the questions, right, that I actually asked, right, she answered, so she passed that bar. And then when I went to go look to see what she was doing, I was like, wow, she took the time to do this as well.
Yeah.
You know what, I might have to let me go in this direction here.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's really great, Dr. Barry. And that sums up this interview. I'm very thankful. I have a lot of insights, I know, and I'm confident that will help out the moms out there, or I mean, my fellow Filipino moms. So thank you so much.